Welcome to English Stories Journey. Listen, relax, and grow your English with every story. In the heart of London, on a foggy December afternoon, stood the dark and narrow office of Ebenezer Scrooge. Time seemed to move slower there, as if even the clocks did not dare to disturb the silence. The room was cold, the windows frosted, and the only sound was the scratch of Scrooge's pen as he bent over his accounts. He was a thin, sharp-looking man, with eyes as cold as winter rain, and lips pressed together in a permanent frown. People said that Scrooge carried the chill of winter inside him all year long, like a storm cloud that never broke. Outside his office door, the world was completely different. The streets were full of Christmas laughter, bright ribbons, and glowing lanterns. Children hurried by with excitement, snowflakes danced in the air, and a warm golden light seemed to spill from every shop window. But none of this warmth reached Scrooge. He kept it all away, as if joy itself were some dangerous illness. On this particular day, the door suddenly opened, letting in a burst of cold air and cheerful energy. It was Fred, Scrooge's nephew, a young man with bright eyes and a smile that warmed even the coldest room. He was wrapped in a red scarf, snow melting on his shoulders, and he carried Christmas in his voice. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle," Fred said happily. Scrooge looked up with a deep sigh. "Bah," he replied. "Humbug." Fred laughed softly. He was used to his uncle's sour attitude, but it never stopped him from trying. "Christmas a humbug? You don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do," Scrooge said sharply. "Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "And what right have you to be miserable?" Fred answered gently. "You're rich enough." Scrooge stared at him with cold disapproval. Fred could feel the icy silence pressing down again, but he did not let it scare him. "Come dine with us tomorrow," Fred said with quiet hope. "My wife would be delighted. We would love to have you." "No," Scrooge said immediately. "Good afternoon." Fred hesitated. "Uncle?" "I said good afternoon." There was nothing more to do. Fred put on his gloves again and walked to the door. Before leaving, he paused and turned. "I'm sorry you feel this way, Uncle. I truly am. But I will keep wishing you a Merry Christmas, whether you like it or not." And with a warm smile, Fred disappeared into the lively streets, leaving Scrooge once again in a room filled with cold silence. A moment later, the door opened again. This time it was two men with friendly faces and kind voices. They carried books and papers in their hands, and they bowed politely. "Mr. Scrooge and Mr. Marley, I believe," one asked. "Mr. Marley has been dead for 7 years," Scrooge replied without emotion. "What do you want?" "We are collecting money to provide food and warmth for the poor. At this festive season, we hope you will make a small contribution." "A contribution," Scrooge repeated, his voice sharp. "Are there no prisons?" "Plenty," the man said quietly, "but many would rather die than go there." "If they prefer to die," Scrooge answered coldly, "they better do it and decrease the surplus population." The two men froze in shock. For a second, they simply stared at Scrooge, hoping he was joking. But Scrooge's face showed only hard seriousness. "We wish you a pleasant Christmas, sir," the man said finally, and the two left, their steps heavy with disappointment. As the evening grew darker, the office became even colder. Scrooge's clerk, Bob Cratchit, sat at his little desk in the next room, wrapped in a thin scarf. His hands trembled from the cold as he wrote. Scrooge gave him only one small piece of coal for heat, and Bob dare not ask for more. At least tomorrow is Christmas, Bob thought, smiling to himself, imagining his family gathered around the tiny table, laughing and celebrating, despite their struggles. When the clock finally struck closing time, Bob stood and wished Scrooge a good night. Scrooge grunted in response, then put on his coat and stepped outside. The city was now covered with fresh snow, glowing softly under the gas lamps. Carolers sang on corners, families hurried home with baskets full of treats, and the bells of nearby churches rang with warmth. Scrooge pushed past it all, refusing to let any of it touch him. He reached his lonely, gloomy house, a tall, dark building that looked almost abandoned. The hallway was cold, the air still, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Scrooge placed his key in the door, and at that exact moment, something strange happened. He blinked. The door knocker had changed. It no longer looked like a metal ring. It had turned into a face, a pale, ghostly face with empty eyes and a twisted mouth. It was the face of Jacob Marley, Scrooge's long-dead business partner. Scrooge gasped and stepped back. His heart pounded, but when he blinked again, the knocker was normal, cold and still, just metal. He shook his head and told himself it was nonsense. Perhaps he was tired. Perhaps the darkness had played tricks on him. Without another thought, he opened the door and went inside. The hallway seemed darker than usual. Every sound echoed. The creak of the stairs, the sigh of the old pipes, the faint whistle of wind under the door. Scrooge lit a candle and climbed slowly to his room, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling forming in his chest. But the moment he closed his bedroom door, a deep metallic sound echoed through the house. Chains, heavy chains, dragging across the floor. Scrooge froze as his candle shook in his hand. The sound grew louder, closer. Step by step, the invisible weight moved up the stairs, its cold touch creeping along the walls. "Impossible," Scrooge whispered. "Humbug, all of it." But then the door burst open, and a ghostly figure entered. Covered in chains, glowing faintly in the dim light, stood Jacob Marley, or what remained of him. His eyes were hollow, and his voice sounded like wind blowing through empty rooms. He said, "Ebenezer Scrooge, do not doubt your senses. I am here." Scrooge's knees trembled. "Marley, what do you want?" "To warn you, to save you from my fate." Marley raised his chains, which rattled with a terrible sound. "These chains I forged in life. I built them link by link through greedy choices and a cold heart. You, Ebenezer, are forging yours even now." Scrooge swallowed, fear spreading across his face. "Is there no hope for me?" "There is," Marley whispered, "but only if you change. Tonight, 3 spirits will visit you. Listen to them, learn from them, or your fate will be darker than mine." The candle flickered wildly, and Marley's form began to fade. "Expect the first spirit when the clock strikes 1. And with a final rattle of chains, the ghost disappeared, leaving the house silent once more, cold, dark, and filled with fear Scrooge had never felt before. The night after Marley's visit felt endless to Scrooge. He tossed and turned in his cold bed, unable to shake the sound of chains from his mind. When the clock finally struck 1, the room filled with a soft, warm glow. Scrooge sat up, his breath caught halfway between fear and curiosity. Standing beside his bed was a gentle, glowing spirit, unlike anything he had ever seen. Its form was delicate, almost childlike, yet its eyes held the wisdom of centuries. Light flowed from it like morning sunshine.
"Are you the spirit whose coming was foretold?" Scrooge asked quietly. "I am the ghost of Christmas past," the spirit replied. "Rise and walk with me." Before Scrooge could protest, the walls of his bedroom melted away. A cold wind swept past him, and suddenly he was standing in the middle of a snow-covered field. The sky was pale and peaceful, and in the distance stood a familiar building. Scrooge stared in disbelief. "I know this place. This is where I grew up." The spirit nodded. "Your past lives on, Ebenezer. Let us look closer." They walked toward the old schoolhouse, a lonely structure with tall windows and a wooden door. The air inside was cold. The long classroom was empty, except for a small boy sitting alone at a desk. His clothes were worn, his hands trembling slightly from the cold. His eyes were fixed on a book, but he was not reading. He was simply trying not to cry. Scrooge gasped. "That boy, that is me." "Yes," the spirit said softly, "left behind while the others went home for Christmas." The child shifted in his seat, listening to the distant laughter of students who had gone home to warm houses, to parents who were waiting for them. But no one waited for him. Scrooge watched in silence. A tightness grew in his chest, not anger, not bitterness, but something deeper. "I was lonely," he whispered. "You were," the spirit replied. "But loneliness teaches its own lessons." The scene faded. They were standing in another room, a cheerful place filled with dancing flames from a huge fireplace. Music played and people laughed as they prepared for a Christmas party. The air smelled of roasted meat and warm spices. Scrooge's eyes brightened. "Fezziwig's warehouse!" he exclaimed. At the far end of the room stood Mr. Fezziwig, Scrooge's old employer, a large man with a warm face and an even warmer heart. His voice boomed with joy as he clapped his hands. "No more work tonight! It's Christmas Eve! Clear the tables and make space for dancing!" Young Scrooge, handsome and hopeful, laughed as he helped move the furniture. Guests arrived, music grew louder, and the room filled with the energy of celebration. Everyone was smiling. Everyone felt welcome. Scrooge's older self watched it all with a mix of delight and sadness. "He was a good man," he said quietly. "A very good man," the spirit agreed. "A little money, that's all it took for him to make us happy," Scrooge said. "Just a little kindness." The spirit looked at him. "Then why have you never shared that kindness, Ebenezer?" Scrooge opened his mouth, but no answer came. His voice sank. I don't know." Before he could say more, the room blurred again. The music faded, and now they stood in a quiet park under a moonlit sky. A young woman waited beside a frozen pond. Her eyes were gentle, though sad, and she held her hands tightly together. Scrooge felt a sharp pain in his heart. "Belle!" Young Scrooge approached her, but his face was strained with worry. His clothes were finer now. He stood straighter, but his expression had lost some softness. "Belle," he said, "this is not the time to discuss such things. My business is growing. It demands all my attention." She looked at him for a long moment. "Your business," she repeated softly. "Everything for you has become business. When we were young, you loved me, but now money has replaced your heart." "That's not true," young Scrooge said quickly. But even as he spoke, he avoided her eyes. An idol has taken my place, Belle said sadly. A golden one. The spirit looked at the older Scrooge. Do you recognize this moment? Scrooge nodded slowly, his throat tightening. I release you, whispered Belle to her younger lover. With all my heart, I hope you may be happy in the life you have chosen. She turned and walked away, her figure fading into the snowy night. Spirit, show me no more, Scrooge pleaded, tears forming in his eyes. I cannot bear it. But the spirit did not stop. For a brief moment, it showed Belle years later, older, smiling, surrounded by children in a warm home. She sat beside a kind-looking husband, their house filled with laughter and love. The spirit said quietly, She could have been yours. Scrooge covered his face with trembling hands. Enough, please. The spirit's glow softened. You wish to understand who you are. These shadows show the path you chose. Scrooge lowered his hands. Tears shone on his cheeks. I didn't know. I didn't realize what I was becoming. The ghost of Christmas past looked at him with gentle sorrow. But now you do. The snowy scene dissolved, colors blurred, light twisted, and Scrooge felt himself falling backward, through time, through memory, through regret. He landed suddenly in his bed, breathless and shaking. The room was dark again. The glow of the spirit was gone, but the ache in his heart remained. Scrooge lay still, staring at the ceiling, unable to escape the truth he had just witnessed. For the first time in many years, he whispered into the silence, What have I done?
Scrooge woke with a start. The room was strangely bright, as if someone had lit 100 candles. For a moment he wondered whether dawn had arrived, but then he remembered Marley's warning and the promise of a second spirit. With trembling hands, he climbed out of bed and slowly opened the bedroom door. The hallway had changed completely. What was usually dark and empty was now filled with greenery, holly, ivy, and bright red berries. A warm golden glow shone from within his sitting room, along with the smell of roasted chestnuts and spiced cakes. And from the center of that warm light came a booming laugh, a laugh so full of joy that it shook the room like gentle thunder. "Come in, Ebenezer Scrooge," a voice called. "Come in and know me better." Scrooge stepped into the room and froze. Sitting on a great throne made of food, puddings, turkeys, oranges, apples, and steaming bowls of punch was a giant of a man, dressed in a green robe trimmed with white fur. His face was kind, his eyes sparkled like lanterns, and the air around him seemed to glow with warmth and life. "I am the ghost of Christmas present," the giant said, smiling widely. "Take my hand, and let us see the Christmas that is happening at this very moment." Before Scrooge could reply, the room dissolved into swirling mist. When the fog cleared, he found himself standing on a busy London street. Snow fell gently over the rooftops, and the city was alive with excitement. People hurried with baskets of food, children played in the snow, and laughter filled the air like music. Every window glowed, every doorway shared warmth, and even strangers greeted each other with smiles and cheer. Scrooge watched silently, almost afraid to breathe. Something deep inside him softened as he saw the way people treated one another, with kindness, generosity, and a happiness that did not depend on wealth. The spirit touched his shoulder. There is still more to see. Again, the city blurred. This time, they appeared in a tiny house at the edge of town. A small, poorly lit home with simple furniture. But the moment Scrooge stepped inside, he felt something bright and warm moving through the air. "This is the house of your clerk, Bob Cratchit," said the spirit. Scrooge blinked in surprise. He had never thought of Bob having a home or a family or a life outside the office. Yet here it was, small, humble, and full of love. Mrs. Cratchit hurried around the kitchen, preparing their modest Christmas dinner, while the children set the table and polished their few plates until they shone. Their laughter mixed with the clatter of pots and pans, creating a harmony sweeter than any carol. In the corner, on a small stool, sat a tiny boy with thin legs and bright eyes. He held a wooden crutch and smiled at his siblings as if he were the happiest child in London. Scrooge stared. "Is that Tiny Tim?" The spirit nodded. "Bob's youngest." The door opened and Bob Cratchit entered, snow still clinging to his coat. He carried Tiny Tim carefully on his shoulder. The boy laughed and held on to his father's neck, his small chest rising slowly with each breath. "God bless us," Tim said cheerfully as he climbed down. Scrooge watched every moment, the way Bob gently touched Tim's shoulder, the way Mrs. Cratchit's smile softened when she looked at her family, the way the children hugged their father as if he were the greatest hero in the world. The dinner itself was simple: a small goose, a few potatoes, and a pudding barely big enough for the whole family. But they treated it like a feast. They toasted one another with joyful hearts, thanking life for what little they had. And then Bob raised his glass. "A Merry Christmas to Mr. Scrooge," he said warmly. Mrs. Cratchit frowned. "I'll toast him for your sake, Bob, not for his. He is a hard, cold man." The children looked at each other, unsure if they should laugh or stay quiet. But Tiny Tim spoke with gentle honesty. "I hope one day he will be kinder." Those simple words struck Scrooge like a hand on his chest. His throat tightened unexpectedly. The spirit stepped beside him. "You see how they love each other, even in their poverty?" "Yes," Scrooge whispered. "I had no idea." "Look at Tim," the spirit said softly. Scrooge turned. Tiny Tim sat quietly, smiling at the others, but Scrooge noticed something he had missed before. Tim's fragile frame, his slow breathing, the effort it took for him to hold his spoon. "Spirit," Scrooge said, his voice shaky, "tell me, will Tiny Tim live?" The giant's joyful face darkened. Slowly he shook his head. "If the future does not change, I see an empty stool by the fireplace, a crutch with no owner." Scrooge felt something heavy and unfamiliar rising inside him. Pain, maybe, or fear, or compassion. "No, no, that cannot happen. Please, Spirit." The giant looked at him with sad eyes. "You once said that if the poor were to die, it would decrease the surplus population. Do you still think so?" Scrooge bowed his head in shame. "I did not know. I did not understand." The spirit placed a hand on his shoulder. "But now you are beginning to." The Cratchit home faded slowly, the family's laughter echoing in Scrooge's ears as the room dissolved into darkness. But the image of Tiny Tim, small, brave, and smiling, remained sharply in Scrooge's heart. For the first time in many years, Scrooge whispered, "I must help them. I must." The ghost of Christmas present nodded, his warm glow fading around them. "Your journey is not over, Ebenezer, for you still have more to learn, and time grows short." And with a final breath of winter wind, they disappeared into the night. Scrooge waited in the stillness of his room, trembling. The laughter of the ghost of Christmas present had faded, replaced by a cold silence that crept along the floor like fog. When the clock struck midnight, the darkness in the corner of the room deepened, growing heavier, thicker, until it shaped itself into a tall, hooded figure. The spirit said nothing. Its face was hidden, its form dark and unmoving, like a shadow cut from the night itself. Only one pale hand reached out from its cloak, pointing silently toward the door. Scrooge swallowed hard. "Are you the ghost of Christmas yet to come?" The figure did not nod, did not speak, but the air around them shifted with a cold certainty. Scrooge felt a fear unlike any he had ever known, yet he forced himself to follow. The moment he stepped toward the spirit, the world dissolved. The darkness thickened, then slowly thinned into a busy marketplace. People moved quickly from stall to stall, chattering cheerfully. But unlike the scenes the previous spirit had shown him, there was no warmth in their voices, only casual gossip. "Did you hear about the old man who died last night?" one man said, laughing as he counted coins. "Oh, yes," replied another. "No one will miss him, that's for sure." "Not a friend, not a family member," said a woman nearby. "A sad life, really, but what can you expect from someone so cold?" They all laughed, unbothered, as if discussing a stranger whose life meant nothing. Scrooge stepped closer, his heart tightening. "Spirit," he whispered, "who were they speaking about?" The silent finger pointed to a small group nearby. They were showing each other items they had taken from a dead man's house, bed curtains, clothes, even the blankets he had died under. They talked with greedy excitement. "He won't need them where he's gone," one woman said cruelly. Scrooge felt sick. Surely this dead man had someone who cared for him. The ghost did not answer. It merely turned, urging him forward. They traveled in silence through empty streets until they reached a poor neighborhood. Inside a small dark room, a lonely body lay covered with a sheet. No one guarded it, no one mourned it, no one even spoke its name. Scrooge's voice shook. "Spirit, please, show me someone who feels something about this death." At once, the scene shifted. Now they stood in the Cratchit home, but the warmth from before was gone. Shadows lay heavy across the room. Bob Cratchit sat in his usual chair, holding Tiny Tim's small crutch in his hands, stroking it gently. His eyes were red. Mrs. Cratchit stood beside him, trying to remain strong for her children, but her voice trembled as she spoke. "He was so light, so quiet, when we carried him to his rest." Bob nodded, wiping a tear. "We must remember how patient he was, how brave." His chest felt as though it were collapsing inward. The empty stool by the fireplace was more painful to see than any bright flame. "Tiny Tim," Scrooge whispered, voice breaking. "Sweet Tiny Tim, gone." He turned desperately to the silent spirit. "Tell me his death can be changed. Tell me there is still hope." But the ghost of Christmas yet to come moved onward, unbending and silent. They walked next to a gravestone gate. A cold wind blew across the gravestones. The spirit pointed to one grave in particular, covered in frost. Scrooge's hand shook as he knelt to read the name, though deep down he already knew. Ebenezer Scrooge. "No," he cried. "Spirit, I am not the man I was. Why show me this if I am beyond hope?" The spirit remained unmoving, the darkness around it unbroken. Scrooge fell to his knees, clutching the phantom's robe. "I will change. I will honor Christmas in my heart.
Only tell me that I may rewrite this future." The world spun around him, cold, black, endless. And then, suddenly, he awoke in his own bed, gasping for breath, the dark spirit gone.
Scrooge woke with a start, expecting darkness or another ghostly vision. Instead, bright sunlight poured through the curtains, warming his face. He blinked at the golden glow, hardly believing it was real. The bells outside rang joyfully, and the air felt fresh and alive, as if the world itself were welcoming a new beginning. "I'm alive," Scrooge whispered, touching his chest. "The spirits have given me another chance. Oh, thank heavens!" He jumped out of bed with more energy than he'd felt in years. His room, once gloomy and cold, now looked almost beautiful to him. He laughed, a strange, rusty sound he hadn't used in a long time. But soon the laugh grew stronger, brighter, until it echoed through the house. "I will live differently," he said. "I will live with joy." He dressed quickly and rushed to the window. Down on the snowy street, Scrooge saw a boy passing by. "You there," he called. "What day is it?" "Today," the boy shouted back, surprised. "Why, it's Christmas Day, sir!" Christmas Day! The spirits had done it all in one night. Scrooge felt tears of gratitude well in his eyes. "Do you know the prize turkey hanging in the butcher's window?" Scrooge asked. "The big one," the boy replied eagerly. "What a clever boy! Yes, the very big one. Go and buy it, and I'll reward you handsomely." The boy's eyes widened, and he sprinted away across the snow. Scrooge chuckled and put on his coat, humming a tune as he stepped outside. The cold air felt like a blessing. He walked with a spring in his step, greeting people with smiles and cheerful wishes. Many stared at him in shock, Scrooge, of all people, wishing them a Merry Christmas. But the surprise quickly turned into warm smiles. Scrooge's next stop was the home of the two gentlemen who had asked for donations the day before. He walked in humbly and slipped a generous sum into their hands. "A donation," he said softly, "for those who need it most. And allow me to beg your pardon for my behavior yesterday." The men were speechless. One finally stammered, "Mr. Scrooge, this is extremely generous." "Not generosity," Scrooge corrected with a kind smile, "just overdue kindness." With his heart lighter than ever, Scrooge made his way toward the Cratchit home. The giant turkey was delivered shortly before he arrived, causing great excitement inside the little house. Bob Cratchit opened the door with wide eyes when he saw Scrooge standing there. "Mr. Scrooge!" Bob whispered, unsure if he should feel fear or confusion. "Merry Christmas, Bob," Scrooge said warmly. "May I come in?" Inside, the Cratchit family gathered around him, uncertain but hopeful. Scrooge smiled at Tiny Tim, who sat by the fireplace, his crutch beside him. "And how is our brave Tim today?" Scrooge asked softly. "Much better, sir." "Good, because from now on, my boy, we'll make sure you grow strong and healthy." That afternoon was filled with laughter, stories, and warm company. Scrooge promised Bob a raise, help for the family, and a future brighter than any they had imagined. And he kept every promise. From that Christmas onward, Scrooge lived with kindness. He became like a second father to Tiny Tim, who did, indeed, grow strong and joyful. Scrooge was welcomed by neighbors, trusted by friends, and loved by the Cratchits. And every year he held Christmas close to his heart, as if it were a treasure he had finally learned to cherish. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe for more English stories.